All right, kia ora everyone. Thanks for showing up. We weren't sure you will show up. We thought we were going to have two friends, but looks like we got way more friends, which is great. This all looks very official, and but we're friendly people. Lots of screens on screen and around. Just making sure that this all is recording for posterity. So welcome again. I'm just going to briefly introduce everyone here on the slides and on our chairs. We got a very mixed and very enthusiastic bunch to talk about the role, the future of screen use in our daily lives and in education, focused on education, obviously. Led by all of this tremendous effort at the top, you see sensible screen use. We have Julie Cullen, who's sitting right here and has been driven this effort for many, many years. Julie is a paediatric physiotherapist. She's also a postgraduate health science student and the founder of Sensible Screen Use, which, to put it simply, is a great resource. It's a website, sensiblescreenuse.org, that collates a lot of the evidence, the literature, the science, as resources for parents and educators around the role and the impact of screens. As a pediatric physiotherapist, she's worked in New Zealand hospitals for the past 20 years, and she's also studying health sciences at the Auckland University of Technology, and is the founder on Sensible Screen Use. So, next up we have Dr. Samantha Marsh, sitting right next to her. Sam is a senior research fellow at the National Institute for Health Innovation, Social and Community Health, within the School of Population Health at University of Auckland. Sam is an academic and a parent interested in the relationship between screen use and child well-being and development, kind of like most of us. And her area of research focuses on building strong connections with children and youth, and the impact of screens on these relationships. Next up we have Lorna. Lorna introduced this evening. Lorna is a primary teacher and a postgrad student at Massey. She's also has a degree in sports and recreation and a certificate in teaching English to speakers of other languages. I didn't know that. That's quite cool. Currently, Lorna is completing further postgraduate study through Massey University, and she's passionate about health, well-being, and social justice in education. Next up, we have the guys. We have the boys. The Andy Bowie at the back there is a tech entrepreneur. He's currently co-founder at My Auto Shop, a trade me backed startup, and he was previously the the New Zealand general manager for Uber, and before that a Facebook sales team member. So coming from a very different angle, bringing a lot of value to the team. And finally, yours truly, I'm a research... I need to read this. I don't know these people. I'm a research fellow at the Faculty of Medical Health Sciences within the University of Auckland. I'm a clinical scientist and an optometrist by trade, so I do research, clinical research in basic science on eye diseases with a focus on ocular surface disease, dry eye disease, particularly something I will talk about tonight, and interested in the broader impacts of our digital lifestyle on eye health and vision. And with that, I'm going to slip to my first slide, one of my 4 screens here. I'd like you to, we build those team building exercises or get to know each other, so we'd rather do a different activity. I'd like you all to focus on your eyes for a second, and take 2 good blinks, and hold your eyes open and look at me or look straight ahead. And notice when you feel your eyes kind of stinging, we're doing a staring contest, essentially, right? So you keep your eyes open. You can do this by time. You can track the time. If you make it to 10 seconds and your eyes don't sting, don't water, you don't need to blink, that's pretty good. But if you feel, so it's not about winning the staring contest, right? Keeping your eyes open for as long as possible. Focus on that. You take 2 good blinks, refresh your eyes, open up your eyes, and you feel that stinging sensation. Now there may be wind, there may be, different things. But that sensation right there, take that and multiply that. Imagine that as a chronic condition. You get to get a glimpse of what dry eye disease feels like. And this is what I study for the past couple of years. I've been researching this condition called dry eye disease, which is one of the most common eye conditions worldwide. It comes from your tears that cover the eye and the eye surface not being quite right. This is a condition that is very common in an aging population. The body kind of just gives up, degrades, and there's structural changes that come with these symptoms of chronic pain. So it comes with a huge burden on quality of life. People who experience dry eye, and the prevalence varies between 5 and even 50% in some of the world. People report, sandpaper on your eyes. It's just a pain. It can be horrible, and there's degrees to that. It can get quite severe, where people have anxiety, depression, can leave their houses, can open up their eyes, can do any visual tasks, and some present with suicidal ideation. Because there's no cure to this condition, it's got a pretty large societal impact, healthcare, but also on work productivity. A lot of people who spend their days in an environment, and you can already see where this is going. If you spend time in a dry environment, you spend the whole day in front of a screen, your eyes feel gritty. And there's various factors that can lead to this condition. So in terms of work productivity, it places a huge burden. Now, we are increasingly seeing this condition now manifest in an ever younger population. In fact, the same game we've played here, the same staring contest we've done, we've taken in a real research setting. In 2019, we were interested to look at this condition in a young population. So we're seeking young people who do a lot of screen time to look at how their eyes manifest in this day and age of digital lifestyles. So we went to a gaming convention in Auckland in 2019. This was the Armageddon Gaming Convention, expecting kids to do a lot of screen time, and they did. They reported an average of 43 hours per week of total screen time, right? So the equivalent of a work week in terms of screen time. Those values probably now pale in comparison to what we do these days, following lockdowns and all of that. But back then, that was a lot. And it turns out it was quite representative for the national average of screen time for youth, 43, 44 hours of screen time weekly. So we played the staring contest with them. So we measured the time it took till they felt that sensation. We had a good cohort. We had about 500 kids, average age of 23, 24. Half of them were under 18, mostly boys, as you'd expect. And we had them fill out surveys that were validated questionnaires for clinical signs and symptoms of dry eye that we use in clinical practice. So we measured the level of discomfort, asked them how many screen hours they do. Huge span. A lot of them would answer, so how many hours a day on screen do you spend? And a lot of them would just think out loud. It's like, I sleep 8 hours a night, therefore it must mean I do 16 hours of screen. I put it down. It's like, geez, obviously gamers. What we found is that these people, in their answers, the more screen time they reported, the worse all of the other parameters we measured they were. So they reported significantly worse comfort, significantly worse blinking behavior. Blinking, you can kind of understand, is tied in to the evolution of dry eye disease, particularly with screen use. When we focus on the screen, we tend to blink less, right? You're engaged, you're focused, so your blinking naturally reduces. Any sort of cognitively demanding task you'll do, and screens are a bit more engaging than other analog tasks. So their blinking was different. And then also the staring contest results were related to the number of hours they did. So the more hours they did, the worse all of these results were. When we looked at the values for comfort, which is one of the criteria for establishing a diagnosis of dry eye disease, 90% of these people qualified as symptomatic for dry eye disease. This is not something we'd expect normally. This is not the only study to show it. In the last couple of years, we're seeing increasingly this condition, which used to be reserved for the old, manifest in a younger population. Now, we are seeing these trajectories, and we have fairly good hypotheses and explanations for how this is driving. And I've already mentioned blinking is a huge factor. Blinking actually leads to the distribution of tears on the eye surface. If you don't blink, those tears simply do not, what you experience when your eyes sting is the tears evaporate and expose the eye surface. And your eye surface is like your cornea, the clear part in front of the eye, is the most densely innervated tissue in the human body. So when that tear layer disappears, that's exposed, and you get that stinging sensation, so you need to protect your eyes, right? And when we do screen time, we know from other various studies that blink rate drops by up. So we blink about 10,000 times a day on average. But when you're on a screen, it depends what you do, that blink rate can decrease by up to 90%, right? So here's where, a fully digital lifestyle or a, full day of screen can or has started to show signs that it is impacting the way the eyes work and feel. So we're seeing these trajectories. We're not seeing that screens directly cause dry eye disease in young people that lead to the kind of severity I've mentioned, but these are trajectories we're seeing. I guess we'll see in 50 years, but whether we want to wait this long or not. The other aspect we're looking at, and colleagues of mine in the Department of, sorry, this was my slide. 90% was symptomatic. The picture is actually not from the Armageddon, it's from the States, but this is what Armageddon kind of looks like, lots of screens. And interestingly enough, you'd expect, well, these are extreme cases, these are gamers, right? We don't, most people are not gamers. When we separated the number of gaming hours that these people reported and looked at all of our values, there were no associations. It was actually just total screen time. So including gaming, work, school, leisure, fun, the total amount of screen time only correlated with the decreasing values we've seen in terms of eye performance and eye health, not gaming. So it's kind of interesting to start thinking about where these excessive behaviors have become to be the norm. I was also going to talk about another aspect before I hand over to Julie, and that is myopia or short-sightedness. You may or may not have heard about this. This is another pandemic which hasn't received quite as much attention. Don't mean to be too doomsday message here, but the latest lockdowns have actually, if there was any good from them, they've provided great breeding ground for a whole host of scientific experiments. And we now have dozens upon dozens of peer-reviewed scientific studies to come out to clearly show, not suggest, that following lockdowns, there's been a significant myopic shift, an increase in short-sightedness in children as a result of staying inside and doing near work. And these are the two main lifestyle factors that we know affect eye growth. This is what myopia is, or short-sightedness. The eye grows too long. If you get a clear image at the back of your eye without glasses, it means that your eye is optically doing what it's supposed to. Put the image at the back of the eye. If your eye is slightly too long, the image just doesn't focus where it should, right? Your camera is not focused, it can't get any further. So then we put on glasses, contact lenses, or laser surgery to move that image to the back of the eye and have good, healthy vision. We now know that, and we've known for a number of years, that doing near work and staying away from sunlight in young years leads to a dysregulation of that growth. So we need natural sunlight, and we need to do tasks that are different distances throughout the day in order to allow the eye to regulate its growth. If we're stuck inside, away from natural sunlight as kids, and doing a lot of near work, which these days happens to be a lot of screen time, that's led to a significant shift in eye growth. It's minimal, but over a long period of time, and thinking forward about these habits, because we are increasingly inside, we are increasingly on screens, this will lead to a further increase in what we project myopia will be. And the WHO has actually a couple of years ago projected that by the year 2050 we'll have over half of the world's population be myopic. I mean, you look around the room and there's maybe 5 of us wearing glasses. But other parts of the world, such as Asia, especially in the developed parts of Asia, we have rates of 99 to 100% of myopia amongst teenage population. This has been, it's been a big deal for many, many years, and we understand that these two lifestyle factors affect it. And in fact, for a long time, it's been assumed that it's an Asian condition. There's an Asian gene that increases prevalence in that population in terms of myopia. But now we know that that's actually due or as a result of the Cultural Revolution in China, where there's been mass urbanization, mass schooling, mass societal pressure, keeping kids inside, doing a lot of reading, a lot of near work, that has led to these shifts. And that combined with a genetic component, because if you have 2 myopic parents, you're very much at risk of developing myopia, has led to these trends. And we've seen this ever since the 17th century. Students of law and medicine tended to be more myopic than others because they've done a lot of reading. Now, you may be tempted to say, well, screens in education and books are the same because you do a lot of reading, but screens are slightly different. They'll keep you there, but you would take a break from your book to talk to your mate, but now you alt-tab to your messaging app, and then your fun and everything is on the screen. And not only that, it's much closer, so there's way less room for the eyes to get a break, in a sense. And the problem with that, because you think, all right, well, myopia is, or short-sightedness is just, you need glasses, and don't we all it's not a big deal. The problem is that a significant proportion of the people develop myopia, about 1/5, will go on to develop high myopia. These start in early years, right? So we're talking about young years, preteen, teenage years, and the eye sort of stabilizes its growth into its 20s, early 20s. High myopia are diopters of 5, 7, and above, which ties into, or is also called, pathological myopia. That extent of growth places such a tension at the back of the eye that the risk for ruptures, tears in the sensitive tissue at the back of the eye, leads to blinding diseases such as glaucoma, cataracts, macular degeneration. These are known conditions. It's not that everyone with high myopia with a -5 and -7 will get that, but the risk is something like 44 or 80-fold. It's exponential the higher these rates go. So this is blinding disease that we're already seeing in clinical practice. The three factors again are genetics, near work, and lack of natural sunlight. This is a condition that's not reversible. It is preventable. We now have, in the last couple of years, we have really exciting tools, medication, even optical solutions that need to be used early on, caught early on in young kids, and you could slow down the progression, potentially stop it. But you cannot reverse it. So once you're at a -5, -7, -10, whatever, even getting laser surgery will just improve the optics. But the growth and the risks that come with that, you will not avoid. So I hope this is not too alarming.
Kia ora, everyone. Sorry, I'm just stand up here. I thought that tonight I might just start by sharing a little bit about why I first became interested in this topic. So as Alex said, I'm a paediatric physiotherapist. I've worked in the hospitals for around 20 years, and I'm doing some postgraduate study as well. But it was a number of years ago now that I first started to see, and also to hear from other clinicians, about kids who seemed to have issues that were relating to high screen use. We had families coming in asking for support, and we had families coming in asking for support with family conflict arising over screen use. So clinicians were talking about their concerns, but also some challenges, like we have recreational screen guidelines in New Zealand. So if whānau come in asking for support, clinicians can use these as a way to talk about balance, and there's also some other resources available that we can help families to find a solution that's right for their whānau. But when it comes to school screen use, there is really very little, and there's very little in the way of guidance. So a group of us got together, and sensiblescreenuse.org was developed, which is a website trying to bring this information together for teachers and educators, and that's sort of where we began. So Alex has been talking about eye health. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some other health conditions that relate to high screen use, both pros and cons, as well as some ways that we can lower the risks. And before I do though, there's an important point to be aware of, and Alex mentioned it as well. It's that we're going to talk about things like balance, and we're going to talk about things like frequency, but when we do, we need to keep in mind that our kids in New Zealand have very high screen use. In fact, their screen use is among the highest in the world. Oh, that's in the wrong place, but anyway. Our kids have among the highest screen use in the world. We know that since the COVID-19 pandemic that kids' screen use has increased since this point. So it is worth noting that the average for kids, which in 2018 our teenagers had on average 42 hours of screen use a week, that's since increased, and that's a similar match to the screen use from Alex's Armageddon dry eye study, where around 90% of participants had symptoms of dry eye disease in the early 20s. So if we move across to the classrooms now, our kids have among the highest use of internet in the world. Our kids have among the highest, or they have the highest use of internet in the world, among the highest use of devices in classrooms in the world, but from young ages. For example, 93% of Year 5 students in New Zealand use devices to learn to read. That's compared to an international average of 44%. Parents in New Zealand are commonly asked to buy devices for their young children to use for learning, but they're personal devices that go home, and that can commonly occur from around 7 or 8 years old in New Zealand. So this raises some questions. Our kids have got high screen use, but does it actually matter? Is this just the way of the future, or are there some things that we might need to do differently? So what I'm going to do now is introduce you to 3 children. These are kids who have been seen in clinics in New Zealand, but just as a disclaimer, this is not their images, these are not their names, they've all been changed for their privacy, but their stories are real. So on the left here we have Tane. Tane really enjoys listening to music through his headphones, and he listens to music during class when he can, and he also has some learning tasks online using his headphones. And if he's got some downtime in the afternoons, he listens to music as well. Now, Tane's just found out from his doctors that he has partial hearing loss, and his doctors think that his headphone use is responsible. So they've asked him to reduce both the volume and the length of time that he's using them. Across from Tane, we have Jason. Now, Jason likes to stay up late online. He is doing his homework, he's hanging out with his friends, he does a bit of gaming, but Jason finds it really hard to switch off afterwards. So he's being medicated to sleep, and this is not uncommon in New Zealand. In the middle, we've got little Jessica. Jessica's 9 years old. She has high myopia, which Alex has just talked about. Jessica may have a genetic predisposition, she may not. Certainly a few years ago we'd have thought that she did have. But she also has frequent use of her device at school. She's at a school which digital devices are used as a main learning platform. She has frequent use of her device at home for recreation, and she also has online homework. So Jessica's doctors have worked intensively with her family to reduce her screen use because they think it's related, and they're trying to to increase her outdoor time and to use eye drops to slow the progression of her myopia. That's to reduce her recreational screen use because they weren't able to have any impact on her school use. So fast forwarding down the track a little, despite the family's efforts, Jessica's myopia has progressed and she's now blind in one eye. In reality, this little girl's ophthalmologists have said her other eye steps behind. She will be blind in both eyes, and by no means is Jessica alone with this issue in New Zealand. Just find where I am after that. So, yeah, these are real kids, and parents get quite concerned about high screen use as well, but they're not on their own. 90% of adolescents say that too much time online is a problem for teenagers, and 60% say it's a major problem. So after seeing kids like these and hearing from other health professionals, we all became quite interested in this topic. So with the wider research community, we started reviewing research on the impacts of screen use on the health and well-being of tamariki and rangatahi, so that's our children and young people. And some points began to come clear. So some screen use can actually be helpful to young people. I'm more specifically talking about teenagers. So, for example, they can look up health information online, they can socialise with their friends and have some fun. But frequent or excessive screen use is associated with negative impacts, risks of harm to our children's health, and in numerous areas of health. Now, the evidence is not conclusive for this. These are relatively new technologies. We don't have the long-term studies available, and that will be years and years away. However, the research and evidence that we do have is broad and growing. Now again, with screen use, and particularly research on screen use, it's a complex topic because, probably as everyone here knows, all screen use is not equal. So while the content, or what kids are doing on the screens, is really important, and that can, it can be helpful, it can be neutral, or it can be harmful, some risks are more about the time spent on screens, or what that screen use displaces. So Alex has already talked about eye health. As you can see from this chart, there are numerous areas of health that are impacted by screen use, and I'm just going to briefly talk about some of those. So, noise-induced hearing loss. Hearing loss is associated with headphone and earbud use. This risk is well accepted and well recognised by leading international health organisations. Experts say to reduce the risks, the less time kids spend using headphones and earbuds, the lower their risk of hearing loss will be. Other ways to reduce those risks are to use well-fitting, noise-cancelling and volume-limiting headphones, and also to use headphones and earbuds at the lowest functional volume. So what that means is the lowest volume that they can still hear clearly with. Now, there's a number of physical problems that are associated with time spent on screens and the way we're using screens for young people. And those include things like back pain, neck pain, headaches, and repetitive strain injury. There's some large studies that show that back pain has a dose-dependent relationship with computer and device use. So what that means is the more hours kids spend using devices and computers, the more they report symptoms of back pain. And studies have also shown that in terms of posture, neck flexion is increased using devices. You will have all heard of TextNet. But it's not just using phones, it's other devices and computers. And most device use involves kids being in a sitting position, static sitting with repetitive movements, and that's the link with repetitive strain injury. All of these areas need more studies and more research. However, WorkSafe New Zealand recognise these risks, and they provide comprehensive information for employees to reduce the harm. So that's information like ergonomic advice, what equipment can be used to reduce risks, workstation layout, things like that. There's other issues such as sleep disturbance. So that can be delayed bedtime because you're having fun, delaying going to bed, difficulty dropping off to sleep. There's also a link with screen use with duration of sleep or poor quality of sleep. So there's things like notifications too that can have an impact there. So some steps to reduce some of those risks would be, stopping screen use the hour before bed or keeping the phone out of the room. There's some other things that can be helpful there as well. Now, weight gain, obesity and low fitness are all linked with excessive screen use. And mental health and cognition are emerging areas where screen use has been linked to poorer outcomes. Cognition means higher brain function, so that's things like attention, memory, intelligence. And we're very lucky that Samantha Marsh Dr. Marsh has come tonight. She's offered to answer questions, particularly she's very knowledgeable about this area and also mental health and social media. And she's also going to talk a little bit about some of the issues with screen research that we're seeing at the moment, so that will be fantastic at the end. Thanks, Sam. But just briefly, screen use has been linked with more difficulty focusing attention and with regulating emotions and behaviours for our children. Now, both for cognition and mental health, the content or what kids are doing on screens seems really important. So balance is still going to be important, but if we can find more information on how kids can use screens positively, this could be really beneficial in these areas. There's also some issues though, even when you've got the greatest content, things like multitasking still don't have a very good association with cognition. Finding more information about those things would be useful as well. One thing we do know is that, unfortunately, our children from lower socioeconomic and prioritised communities in New Zealand have higher screen use than their more advantaged peers. So unfortunately, these children are at more risk. Now, when it comes to screens in education, we can't just consider this from a health perspective. We also have to consider the opportunities the digital platforms bring to learning, and it's 2022. Our kids are going to need excellent digital skills to go on to the workforce when they finish school, to go on to higher education, but even just to participate in society. And digital platforms can support learning. So keeping all this in mind, we also reviewed research on the impacts of digital platforms on learning outcomes. And this is what we found. Small studies can show some mixed results, but large-scale studies are showing emerging evidence that, again, some use of digital platforms can be helpful to learning, but there seems to be a ceiling effect where more frequent use it can be associated with poorer learning outcomes. Now, this includes for gaining digital skills. Again, it's a complex topic because all screen use isn't equal. And some of those large studies internationally and from New Zealand are starting to give us, they're starting to show patterns which give us ideas about what could be more helpful and less helpful when it comes to using devices in the classrooms. An example of this is a recent report for the Ministry of Education, which came out last year. Now, this report looked at 15-year-olds in New Zealand using PISA data, but that report matched other large-scale studies, and what they found was that conditions of use seem really important when it comes to devices and learning outcomes for kids. So those were the length of time they're used for, the tasks that were selected, and in whose hands the device actually is. So in terms of length of device use, we just talked about that. In terms of task selection, when kids were using the internet to find information, that's, for example, inquiry learning or doing projects, that was associated with improved learning outcomes. So in that report, they looked at a number of other tasks, and those include things like learning apps and simulations and online homework and a number of others as well. And all of those were linked to reduced performance, reduced learning outcomes. Interestingly, from that report, when schools said that they had excellent internet access and good access to devices for their kids and, importantly, good training for their teachers, they were well prepared to integrate device use into learning. Those schools generally had lower performance than schools that said they didn't have the same level of access. Now, when it comes to primary schools, there are some differences. Again, those large-scale studies suggest that some use of platforms, digital platforms, can support learning. Those more look at senior primary students, so that's years 5 and 6. But when it comes to learning core skills, that may not be the case. So for core skills like reading, using devices frequently to learn can be associated with reduced learning outcomes. An example of this is a recent study for the Ministry of Education that came out last year. And they looked at PIRLS data, so that's an international measure of literacy. And what they found was that in Year 5 students in New Zealand who use devices to do literacy tasks more than once a week, they had reduced reading enjoyment and performance from that data. Now that matches other large-scale studies showing that when children use devices to learn to read, they have reduced reading performance. And there's also studies showing that the more that children have access to devices with e-reading capabilities, the less they read. As I mentioned, our Year 5 students in New Zealand, around 93% use devices to learn to read, compared to that international average of 44%.
Okay, great. Thank you, Julie. Kia ora. So we live in a digital world. There's no getting away from that, and our tamariki and rangatahi need to be digitally fluent as well. So the assumption in education is, therefore, we must embrace technology. And yes, technology can increase engagement and motivation. However, research shows that increased engagement when using devices in the class doesn't necessarily translate to improved learning outcomes. Now, if you want to delve into this further, there's a really interesting report done by John Hattie and Aaron Hamilton, published in 2021. It's called All That Glitters Isn't Gold. It's a meta-analysis on device use in education and over 2 million participants. Now, I'm just going to expand on Julie's literacy comments that she made earlier. There is a world-renowned professor of literacy who's been looking at digital reading versus reading in print or analogue reading. Her name's Professor Marianne Wolfe, and she is the director at UCLA Centre for Diverse Learners, Dyslexia and Social Justice. She also has a doctorate in cognitive neuroscience and psycholinguistics, specifically on the learning brain, language and dyslexia. So Her podcasts are fantastic, and if this is an area that you're interested in, I completely recommend looking her up and listening to her online. And she says what we can do with primary age children is that we can absolutely embrace all the exciting technologies such as computational thinking, robotics, coding, but until our students have achieved fluency in core skills such as reading, more traditional methods of teaching may be better. Now, there was a really interesting study, it's a longitudinal study looking at digital natives versus people who learned to read in print. And what the researchers hypothesized was that the digital natives were going to do so much better when reading online platforms. And what they found, surprisingly, was the reverse. People that learned to read in print were able to comprehend better in online or digital media than the digital natives. And as that study continued over time, those results became even stronger. So there are some interesting reasons why this may be the case. When we read in print, there are some differences to reading digitally. So we have more physical cues. We have the spatial representation of the text on the page and in the book. We have the shape of the book and how it feels. Studies show we read from left to right when we're reading in print, and we read much more slowly. We are more likely to go back and reread the text, and we're also able to comprehend more and retain more than online reading. When we read online, we're reading in an F pattern. So we're skimming, we're scanning, we're keyword spotting, we're reading much faster and usually greater volumes of text. So long or complex texts that are digital are much more challenging to comprehend, and you are less likely to retain the information that you're reading because of the way that you're reading. So particularly for older students, understanding the strengths of both mediums is really important so that they can choose the best tool for the task. Now, a few years ago in New Zealand education, there was a discussion about how handwriting will soon be irrelevant. And I have to say it's making a comeback, so there's no need to throw away the pens and papers just yet. Research shows that when we write by hand, we engage much more sensory and motor input. So that provides more hooks to hang the learning on. It engages the same neural pathways that you use when reading, even prior to developing reading skills. It's cognitively demanding in the junior years, and also it increases the recognition of letters, letter sounds, and words more effectively than visual recognition. The physical and repetitive process of handwriting doesn't become fluent until around the age of 10, and it requires practice, little and often. As a result, handwriting supports learning to read. It supports spelling and writing development, with early handwriting ability being associated with writing ability, and that's looking at content in later years. Students are likely to retain more information when writing by hand, and that's right up to and including university level. These, of course, are generalizations, and students with additional learning needs may have more to gain from digital platforms, and that is something that is really important to be aware of. Typing is efficient, and it's best taught in upper primary and intermediate once handwriting and spelling are fluent. So regarding maths, we're just running short on time, so I'll just quickly touch on the report that Julie was talking about earlier. There were some differences with maths. Some of the digital platforms did support maths learning outcomes. When teachers used digital platforms to teach mathematics, learning outcomes improved. When teachers used devices with students, or students used devices independently, learning outcomes were lower. So if there are any teachers here, Like myself, you may well know that we tend to use learning apps as part of our teaching toolkit for teaching mathematics, but learning apps were associated with reduced outcomes. To sum up, computational thinking, coding, robotics, they're examples of really exciting fields that our tamariki need to be exposed to. Digital skills are important, and we can teach these in the early years. In fact, computational thinking doesn't even require a device. There are fantastic resources out there that teachers can access. Learning to write fluently by hand, learning to read fluently in print, rather than digitally, are important tools in our teaching toolkit for developing foundational literacy skills. Then we can help students understand which tool is going to be best for the job.
With this information, we can go back to our original question. So that was, New Zealand kids have high screen use, but does this really matter? Is it just the way of the future? Is this just moral hand-wringing? Or do we need to do some things differently? So from our work, we've got some take-home points that can help to consider this decision. So digital technologies are a part of our kids' lives. The content that they're using is really important. The content's important, and we do need more research on how kids can use these technologies positively so that they can get the best out of them. Now, that content is important, but screen use in school needs to be considered as part of a child's 24-hour day, because some health risks are more to do with the time spent on screens. So content matters, but so does time and balance. Children's age and stage of development also needs to be a part of that equation, and some of the health risks may be increased for younger children because of their growth and stage of development. Now, this is an issue of balance. Some use of digital platforms in school can be helpful. But when we think of balance, particularly in New Zealand, we need to be aware that we may be a little out of step with much of the world. Our kids have got really high screen use, so we need to keep that in mind, because that is despite all children facing a digital future. The evidence on this topic isn't conclusive, but the level of evidence that we do have, both on the impacts on health and on education, have led to calls for caution and for purposeful and well-researched use of devices in the classroom. Now, this is from that most recent Ministry of Education report. Now, what this comes down to for us is this: the evidence isn't conclusive. It's going to be years and years away. But the evidence that we do have is growing, and it's showing that frequent screen use is associated with a risk of harm for our young people. At the same time, emerging evidence is showing that frequent screen use in the classroom can also be associated with reduced learning outcomes, including gaining digital skills, which are so important. So when it comes to, do we think there needs to be some changes? Do we need to do things differently? We think we do need to do things differently. We think we need to be talking about this, and we need to be reflecting on the way that we're using screens and devices with our kids, because not only do our kids have high screen use, it's increasing. And there is a huge push for this in education in New Zealand. Other countries, which Alex mentioned, are doing the opposite. So it's a really important topic. Now, the challenge really, I think, comes as, moderate, balanced use can have some helpful outcomes for our kids. But as New Zealand kids increasingly use screens, both in school and education, that frequent use is becoming normal. But our kids do need digital skills. So the question then becomes, what does it take to achieve those? Now, we're really lucky to have Andy Bowie here tonight. Andy is really well positioned to answer some of these questions. Andy is a tech entrepreneur, and he is employing our young people. As Alex mentioned, Andy's previously worked for Facebook. He's previously been the manager of New Zealand Uber Eats, and we'd really like to hear your thoughts, Andy.
One moment, just make sure the tip doesn't fail. What we're doing is every walking through here, I might come your way soon. Bear with me. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, thanks a bunch, Julie. Is this part of the tech failed as well? It's gone blank. You guys don't see that part, so it doesn't matter. Awesome. Hey, thank you very much. Before I get into it, I do try and capitalize on opportunities like this. I am hiring. And funnily enough, I'm hiring software developers as well. So look, ideally I want a full stack developer, bit of front end lean ideally, native and React, JavaScript as well is pretty up there, C++ and Python, if anyone out there's got it there, database management, and I really need a good SQL query wizard. Okay, that's right up there. A bit of Node.js as well, and maybe some Laravel. Our staging platforms sit on Laravel, so it's one of those complications. And of course, you need to have a degree, and ideally probably 5 years plus experience at some of the sort of large Apple, Google, whatever you like.
I'll take your applications.
Does anyone put their hand up for that? These are my... Yeah, well, this is the challenge, right? You can imagine being in my position. And look, I'm willing to pay a lot of money for it as well. And look, this seems to be the common reaction, unfortunately. And as you would have seen in news articles, there's shortages of software developers. And as the world is digitizing so rapidly as we all try and keep up, businesses like mine are just trying to capitalize it, but can't find the people to do so. And look, as much as I'd love to go and take off to the mountains and go skiing and get away from it all, we're not going to be able to change it. And as we know, there's benefits to it, as this technology that half the time works does make our lives better. But while I listed out all those technical requirements, that probably only gets you a third of the way for me wanting to actually hire you. And this is the same as the criteria we had at Uber, Facebook, and a lot of my fellow founders and the like are looking for in businesses. The reality is there's more attributes that are important to being a great employee and contributing to a business than just being able to be a wizard with Node.js or write some great Python. And funnily enough, as I'm told, you don't need a computer to learn these. And actually, if you try and do it on your computer, you're not going to do so well, as we've heard from these guys. So some of the attributes that we are actually looking for is things like empathy, being able to understand your customers, your suppliers, your teammates. You can't build great product and digital apps if you don't understand how someone else around you works and what they need. Being able to collaborate in the team. The days of just working in a silo are gone. I want people that know how to obviously process data, but both objective and subjective data, and actually be able to take an initiative, interpret that, and then make a decision. It's pretty hard to learn that from an app. And then, of course, the ability to give and receive feedback. That's a huge key ingredient for tech companies these days. And you don't learn that from an app, because the computer, other than giving you maybe a score out of 10 when you didn't do so well in the snake game, doesn't really give you much quality feedback. And it doesn't really hurt that emotionally when you can just hit play again. And with some of these, funnily enough, I hear are actually quite well aligned to some of the core competencies that are being taught in schools at the moment, which is absolutely fantastic. But I fundamentally believe they're better taught, especially in early years, not on an iPad, a video call, or through a learning app. This is some of my younger digital team. I've had amazing success recruiting young people out of Auckland University and a few other places as well. And while they absolutely need a computer to do their work, this is Vincent. He's actually my CTO, albeit he looks about 14. He spilt a glass of water on his computer the other day. He was useless for about 3 days. Honestly, he couldn't do anything. I've had him sweeping the floor. He was pretty useless at that as well. Bloody high-paid sweeper, that's for sure. But while they need their computers, they actually need to be able to work as a team. And they need each other to be able to do their own jobs effectively. So I think it's worth noting that this opinion isn't just one of my own. The vast majority of tech companies, as I've said, around the world are very much looking at personality attributes as core parts of their hiring criteria. But they're also taking that mantra not just at work, but home as well. So if we take a couple of examples of, say, Google and Snapchat, obviously two of the most iconic digital companies that hire some of the best engineers around the world. Not only do they have a more holistic hiring criteria, but their leaders are going a step further and actually taking some of these learnings and bring them home as well to their upbringing of their own kids. Just to make sure they're set with the right fundamentals, that one will take them through life, but obviously be successful in the workplace as well. So I mean, Sundar, classic example, CEO of Google, he says he's got an active criteria for his kids to be able to use the TV. So I'm pretty sure there's some sort of ratio of outdoor time to device time, which I think is fantastic. And then I mean, another classic, Evan probably was the inventor of the most addictive way of consuming content. Now gives his kid a limit to only 1.5 hours a week, which is baffling compared to the averages that we're hearing already. So look, while we absolutely live in a digital world, we can't forget the fundamentals that are so important to take people once they get into the workforce through their entire career. Not just the ability to write great Python isn't going to make you a highly successful digital employee.